It started with thunder, not the kind that rumbled gently in the background, but the kind that cracked the night open like a bone snapping in two. I remember sitting by the window of my apartment, watching the rain smear across the glass, trying to convince myself I didn't care that Rowan hadn't texted me back. He never owed me anything. We were just friends, best friends. That was a boundary I had built and rebuilt 1,000 times in my head, hoping that repetition would turn it into truth. I was halfway through distracting myself with some old movie when the intercom buzzed. My heart jumped before my mind could catch up. No one came to my place unannounced. No one except him. I opened the door, and there he was, soaked to the bone, hair dripping into his eyes, clutching a backpack like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "Landon and I had a fight," he said, stepping inside before I could ask. Rowan didn't look at me when he spoke. He rarely did when he was trying not to cry. I took his bag and handed him a towel. He sat down on my couch like he'd done 100 times before, but something was different tonight. The silence between us wasn't comfortable like usual. It was trembling. She said I don't open up, that I shut her out. I didn't know what to say, because she was right. Rowan never really let anyone in, not fully, except maybe me. Maybe, do you want to talk about it? He shook his head. I couldn't be there tonight. I needed somewhere that didn't feel like a war zone. I nodded. You can stay here. Take my bed if you want. He gave a faint smile, that boyish kind that used to make girls fall for him before he even said a word. But tonight it faltered halfway through. Would it be weird if I asked you to just stay with me? He said. Like in the bed, just tonight. I hesitated. My throat tightened. Yeah, I said softly. Of course. It wasn't the first time we'd shared a bed. On camping trips, after parties, nights when Uber took too long, and crashing at my place was easier. But this time it felt deliberate, like he needed more than sleep. I followed him into my room, both of us still damp and silent. He lay on his side, facing the wall. I slid in beside him, careful not to touch. But then, without warning, he backed into me. His shoulder brushed against my chest. And then he sighed, slow and deep, like exhaling something he'd been holding on to too long. You okay? I asked, barely above a whisper. Not really, he answered, but I feel better here. I didn't know what to do with that. His voice wasn't steady. It cracked at the edges like he was close to shattering. And so I did what he asked. I held him, carefully, like he was a thing that might break. My arm wrapped around him, his back warm against my chest. I could smell rain in his hair, sweat on his skin. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just comfort, that this was a moment. Even though every cell in my body was telling me otherwise, we lay there in silence. My heart beat too loud. My thoughts screamed too much. And then his hand moved, just a little. It slid over mine. His fingers, cold and trembling, laced with mine. Not by accident. I didn't breathe. He didn't say a word. The storm outside faded into the distance, but the one inside me cracked open like lightning. I didn't ask questions. I didn't speak. Because if I did, it might end. If I did, he might pull away. Eventually, somewhere between midnight and morning, he did. Quietly, slowly, he let go of my hand and turned back toward the wall, like he was resetting the boundary that had just been crossed. When I woke, he was gone. No note, no message, just a faint smell of rain and regret left on the pillow beside mine. And that was the moment I realized the worst kind of silence isn't the kind between words. It's the kind that comes after something real, something fragile, is left unnamed. I didn't know then what it meant, or what it would cost, but I felt the break before I ever saw the cracks. He didn't mention that night. Not once. The next time I saw him, Rowan showed up with a six-pack and that same familiar grin, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't held him while he trembled in my arms, like he hadn't slipped his fingers into mine as if it meant something. I waited for conversation to shift, to veer toward honesty, but it never did. We sat on my couch, watching some late-night comedy, laughing at all the wrong moments, both pretending we didn't remember what we both knew too well. I told myself maybe it didn't mean anything to him. Maybe it was just a moment of weakness. And that was okay. People break in strange ways. I could carry that weight alone. But he started texting more, long, thoughtful messages at odd hours. He'd call during his lunch breaks just to ask how I was sleeping or what I'd eaten that day. His words didn't say much, but his voice lingered too long. The pauses stretched too wide, and every silence held something I didn't know how to name. Then came the night he kissed me. We both had a few drinks, enough to blur the lines but not erase them. We were standing on my balcony, city lights flickering below us, and I said something stupid. Something about how tired I was of pretending I was fine all the time. He looked at me like I'd handed him something fragile. And then, without hesitation, he leaned in. It wasn't rushed or aggressive. It was soft, like a secret he was finally ready to say out loud. But it lasted only a moment. As soon as it was over, he pulled back like he'd touched fire. "Micah, I shouldn't have done that," he muttered, rubbing his face with both hands. "I'm sorry. That was messed up." I stood there frozen, every inch of me still burning from where his lips had touched mine. I wanted to ask him what it meant, but he was already walking back inside, already rewriting it as a mistake. That night, he didn't sleep over, and for the first time, I was the one left in the cold. I told myself not to make it bigger than it was. I'd seen this happen before. People get confused. They reach out when they feel unloved, and sometimes you just happen to be the warmest thing nearby. But his words and actions didn't match. 1 minute, I was his confidant, his safety net. The next, I was just his shadow again. Still, I kept letting him in. He started spending most weekends at my place. We cooked together, played games, fell asleep on the couch watching reruns of shows we both knew by heart. Sometimes we shared a bed. Sometimes he held my hand. Sometimes he kissed me and then apologized like love was something he owed back. "Don't tell anyone about this," he whispered once, after pressing his forehead to mine. "It's just between us." It felt like a promise and a prison in the same breath. I stopped talking to Devin as much. Every time he invited me out, I made excuses. Because what if Rowan needed me? What if this time he was ready to say it out loud? I kept telling myself we were building towards something real, that what we had was just hidden, not broken. But cracks don't always show at first. One afternoon, we were lying on my bed, his head resting on my shoulder, eyes fluttering from sleep. I watched him like he was a painting. Every line on his face memorized, every breath counted. I almost said it then. "I love you." The words were there, balanced on the edge of my tongue. But I swallowed them whole, because he hadn't given me permission to feel that way. And I was terrified that if I said them, he'd disappear again. I started noticing the distance before I had the courage to name it. His text came later. Shorter, colder, no more late-night voice notes. No more sudden drop-ins with excuses like, "I was just in the area." I told myself he was busy, that work had picked up, that maybe things with Landon were calming down again. But deep down, I felt a shift, like the ground was moving beneath my feet, slowly, almost kindly, so I wouldn't notice until it was too late. Then one Thursday, I saw it. A photo on Devin's Instagram. A blurry shot from a group dinner I hadn't been invited to. Rowan was there, smiling with his arm draped around Landon's shoulders. And on her hand, a ring. I stared at the image until my eyes burned. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was staged. But I knew better. There was a glow on her face that only joy could paint. A glow I'd never seen on his when he was with me. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt like it had caved in. I waited a day, then two. No message. No explanation. Just silence. So I called him. He picked up on the third ring, voice casual. "Hey, man, what's up? You got engaged?" I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. There was a pause, heavy and loud. "Yeah, it just happened. Kinda sudden, I guess." "You didn't think to tell me?" He sighed. "I was going to. It's just complicated." "Not really," I said, my hand shaking. "Not when you've been sleeping in my bed." "Micah," he said, and the way he said my name, soft, guilty, exhausted, made me want to scream. I waited. It wasn't real, he continued. I mean, it was, but not like that. Not like what? I was in a bad place. Landon and I were falling apart. You were there, and I leaned on you too much. I know that. You kissed me. I know. You said I was the only one who understood you. I meant that. But it didn't mean anything? He didn't answer. Say it, I said, my voice cracking. Say it didn't mean anything so I can stop pretending. He exhaled. It meant something, but not everything. That was the moment the world split. He hadn't lied, not entirely. He'd let me believe. He'd let me hope. And then, when the dust cleared, he picked the version of himself that the world would understand. The version that looked good on paper. The version that didn't include me. You used me, I said quietly. No, he whispered. I was just lost. Then why do I feel like the one who's broken? I didn't wait for an answer. I hung up. I didn't cry. Not then. Not right away. I just sat there, still and hollow, trying to piece together when love turned into something disposable. When I became the secret he didn't want to carry anymore. I replayed every moment in reverse. Every look, every touch, every word that sounded like a maybe. I searched for signs that this was coming, but all I saw were all the times I chose to believe him instead of believing myself. The next day, he texted, I'm sorry you're hurt. I never wanted to make things messy. I didn't reply, because it was never messy for him. I was the only one tangled in this thing we never named. And still I missed him, not the Rowan who chose Landon, not the Rowan who walked away, but the one who leaned into me when the world felt too loud, the one who whispered, don't go in the dark, even when he knew he couldn't stay. But that version of him wasn't mine. Maybe he never was. Still, I kept hearing his voice in my head, like an echo from a place I was no longer welcome in. The days bled into each other like ink on wet paper. I stopped marking time by weekends or text messages. Life moved forward, indifferent to the weight I carried. The world didn't pause to grieve with me, and I didn't expect it to. Not anymore. For a while, I avoided the places we used to go. The coffee shop with the crooked tables. The bookstore he once dragged me into because he claimed I needed more fiction and less overthinking. Even my own bed felt foreign, like it still remembered how it felt to have his breath brush the back of my neck. Devin reached out, gently, without questions. He invited me to a small dinner. I almost declined, but something in me stirred, a need to be seen by someone who didn't carry the weight of my silence. I went. I smiled. I laughed when I didn't want to. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing with both lungs. Healing wasn't linear. It didn't come with closure or apologies. It came in fragments. A morning where I woke up and didn't reach for my phone. A night where I made dinner without thinking about whether Rowan would have liked it. A moment on the subway when I saw someone who looked like him and didn't flinch. He texted me again. A month later. Just one line. I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood that I didn't have to respond. I didn't owe him my forgiveness just because he was afraid of what silence meant now. There was a part of me that still loved him. Maybe always would. But love without respect, without truth, wasn't love. It was longing dressed up as hope. I wrote him a letter I never sent. You asked me to hold you, and I did with everything I had. I held your silence, your confusion, your fear. I held the parts of you you couldn't face. But you never held me back. You let me believe there was something growing between us when all along it was only me watering the soil. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just empty in the places you used to live. And that's okay, because emptiness can be filled. And next time, I'll make sure it's with something real. I folded the letter and tucked it into a book he once borrowed and never returned. Not because I thought he'd read it, but because it felt like a way to place the weight somewhere outside my chest. Some nights, I still think about him, not with the ache that used to paralyze me, but with a kind of distant softness, a memory of a boy who was almost mine, in a life that could never be ours. And in that space, I found something I hadn't expected, peace. Not because he apologized, Not because anything was resolved, but because I finally chose myself. I walk alone now, not in sorrow, but in quiet strength. I no longer crave his voice in the silence or his hand in the dark. I learned that sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't being left behind. It's being asked to stay in a story where you're not allowed to speak. He once told me I was the only one who understood him. Maybe that was true, but I wish I'd understood myself sooner.